alaikum and welcome back to another episode of the Manifesting Muslim Ramadan series, Aligning with Allah. Yesterday I left you on a bit of a cliffhanger and I hope you're good. I hope it wasn't too bad. I mean, you're only waiting one day between episodes, so it's not so bad, inshallah. But today we're going to continue the conversation and talk about safety, that for us to feel safe in our relationship with Allah before we can surrender. Okay, that we need an element of safety in our relationship with Allah in order for us to actually also surrender fully to Allah. So surrendering, right? You will have heard it so many times. Surrender your will to Allah's will, and surrender and let Allah do. But if you don't feel safe, if it doesn't feel safe to surrender, how do you actually then surrender? Nobody talks about how you get to the state of surrender, what that actually feels like. And in fact, I think that many people, instead of actually surrendering, end up playing a little bit of tug of war with Allah, trying to sort of hold on to certain things because it doesn't feel quite safe enough. And so, we say we surrender and, our words say it and we do mean it, but we don't know how. We don't know what surrendering feels like. And we don't feel safe to surrender it still. So we end up still kind of playing that tug of war, micromanaging, not quite releasing it, still feeling like we need to stay on top of certain things, even though we've said we're going to surrender it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? But here's the thing about surrendering. Like whether it is, here in this dunya or to other people or to Allah, the point about surrendering is that you can't surrender fully if it feels unsafe to you. It's about emotional safety, it's about physical safety, it's about spiritual safety, intelligent safety. I don't know if that can be a thing, but it's safety in everything. Safety to surrender has to sort of encompass everything. Surrendering to Allah specifically encompasses everything. And here's the thing that I will tell you. You can't surrender to something that you don't trust. Hold on, because I'm sure that some of you are like, but I trust Allah. How do you say blah, blah, blah? I get it. No, I sounded like a chicken. The point is, that can feel, again, a little triggering for us to hear. What do you mean? I trust Allah. Of course I trust Allah. Yeah, in theory. You understand theoretically, maybe even intelligently, what trusting Allah is. And in theory, you trust Allah. But in practical terms, again, we've spoken about this in episode, I can't remember, the one where we spoke about tawakkul, okay? You can go back and re-listen to that one if you need to. We spoke about the difference between a theoretical understanding of trust versus a lived one. Okay, it's not enough to say I trust you if you don't also then live by that trust. This is why I say tawakkul is not just a belief, it is a lifestyle. Okay, it's a mindset and a lifestyle. You have to actually live in your trust in Allah. And here's the next level of that. You can't trust what you don't know. So you can't surrender to someone you don't trust, and you can't trust what you don't know. Okay, those are sort of like the two steps to surrender. So if you want to surrender, you have to trust. If you have to trust, you have to know. So if you want to understand the full level of surrender from a place of complete trust and faith in Allah, you need to know Allah. Now, I've said it before and I will say it again. My darling, you need to pick up a Quran in your own language, or in a language that you understand if there isn't one in your language. And you need to get to know Allah from Allah's own words. It's enough with the outsourcing. We don't need to hear how an imam thinks about Allah, what Mufti Menk says, what Umar Suleiman says. They all have beautiful opinions and may Allah reward them for their efforts, but from Allah's own words. Okay, you need to hear how Allah speaks about himself. And I know, because I get this question a lot, like, but like when I'm reading the Quran, there are all of these other things that come up. And, how do I separate, his punishment from, this, that, and the other? And you do that by setting an intention. You set an intention. I'm choosing to open up my Quran today to get to know Allah. And make a little dua if you need to. Ask Allah for clarity in what He's providing you in the dua, what He makes your heart, your mind, your everything kind of like hold on to as you're reading. And some of the messages might sound a little harsh, right, to begin with, because Allah does talk about punishment in the Quran, punishment of the disbelievers, of the kafirs, the arrogant people, so on and so forth. So sometimes it's like, oh my God, this is so scary and I'm so scared of Allah now. But this is why context matters, right? So we don't just read little pieces here and there and then leave it at that. We take it into consideration. When I'm saying read your Quran, by the way, and I don't know if I've said this already before, but if I haven't, let me just make it very clear now. I'm not talking about reading it like you're reading a novel, skimming through it. Oh, well, look, I already read like 30 pages today. No, 1 page, 2 pages a day, more than enough. The Quran is hard to read, and I want you to read to understand. So that can take some work, to read through anything from that perspective. And that might also mean that you might want to do what I've been doing when I read my Quran, which is have the Quran tajweed online as well. So I can, if there's something where I'm like, oh, I don't really know what that means, but that sounds like not very nice or whatever, I will go and look up the tajweed. What does this mean? What is this in relation to? What is Allah referring to? And usually there's a reason why He's saying what He's saying, because it actually relates to something. And so then we can, from a logical, intelligent perspective now say, that doesn't actually apply to me then, or that applies to these kinds of people, or that applied to those people in, from back then, or whatever. And so now we can, again, from a logical, intelligent perspective, again, filter through what we're reading. It's very important when we read the Quran. Number one, read it how you want to. There's no wrong way of reading the Quran, but I want you to understand that Allah might highlight certain things for you, like kind of make you feel drawn to certain things. And some of them might not always be like, daisies, birds and kitten poop. Some of it might feel really harsh and scary, but sometimes it's because Allah chooses to highlight that to give a warning. Hey, pay attention, right? Again, I spoke about it in one of the previous episodes, but Allah's mercy is not always comfortable. It's not always, but it is still His mercy. So sometimes He might come to you with a little warning as you're reading, but that is still Allah's mercy. And the more you read and the more you accept, and you stop trying to argue against, and you stop trying to protect yourself from getting to know Allah and all the aspects of Allah, the easier it becomes for you to actually see as you're reading on that His punishment and the severity and all of those things only really applies to a select few people, but His mercy and His compassion and His forgiveness, He is so abundant with it. He is so abundant with it, and we really get a greater understanding of it because when we're reading the Quran, because He affirms it to us over and over and over and over again in the Quran. If you want affirmation on who Allah is, let Allah affirm it to you for Himself, from His own words. You cannot trust what you don't know. So get to know Allah. Create a relationship with Allah. One thing that I've asked the girls that I work with to do often is, using the names of Allah before you go into a dua. Look through the names of Allah. Who am I connecting with in this dua? Which name speaks to me right now? What aspect of Allah do I want to speak with right now? And there are so many beautiful names. And if we can sort of pinpoint, I want to speak to Al-Musawwir. That's the one today because I want him to create something, perfectly for me. Then I'll speak to Al-Musawwir. And so look at, the names and be like, that's the Allah I want to speak to. So again, now you can sort of like almost tap in to the different aspects of Allah, and you can do it from a certain level of trust because you take the time to get to know Allah and His multi facets of who he is, right? Instead of just the one or two that's being regurgitated to us through, well, wallahi, podcasts, even like my own, you know, and imams and scholars and TikTok and whatever else, right? But you need this kind of trust in Allah in order to surrender, because surrender requires trust. Surrender requires that you fully let go, and you cannot let go if you do not trust. And we see this again, time and again, with the prophets, the chosen people, and even the people close to the prophets. You know, Sidna Musa alayhi salam's mother, when she was asked to let go of her son and put her son in the basket and in the river. Oh, that must have been so difficult for her, right? I'm not even a mother, but oh my goodness, if he asked me to put one of my cats in a basket and let it flow down the river, I'd be like, listen, Allah, why? Can we talk about it? So, imagine, to have to put your baby in a basket and trust that Allah will do good with his promise of you will see him again. And he held up with that promise. But that level of surrender, you're literally surrendering your child, right? And then Allah, takes care of it. And she ended up, being brought back to him, not that much later on in life, I think he was even still a baby. Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't she essentially nursing him again, because his sister followed the basket and thing. Either way, the point is, we don't have to go into the details of the story, but it's a beautiful element of surrendering, right? I'm surrendering. I can't control it, but Allah says, so I'm going to do. Right. And of course, we're not being asked necessarily to put our babies in baskets and put them in rivers and kind of give up our children. We're being asked to surrender our dua, to surrender our need for a husband before the age of 25, to surrender the amount of financial abundance one thing will give us or another thing will give us or whatever else, like in the greater scheme of things. And I'm sorry if can sound a little bit demeaning, but I don't mean it to be, but in the greater scheme of things, quite minuscule things, like it's not that deep. Right? And we're being asked to surrender back those things. And that can be hard enough, especially if we're more attached to dunya than we are to Allah. But we can't be attached to Allah if we don't trust Allah. So working on that trust, working on getting to know Allah. And it'll take time, sis. And that's okay. That's okay. You'll have little thoughts that might come up again, especially when shaitan is being released again after Ramadan, where he's going to whisper in your ear. And then you'll, maybe it might be a little bit more difficult because he's definitely going to try his best to steer you off course. But this is why, we're not depending on ourselves to keep ourselves on, a straight path. We've got the Quran. And in the Quran, Allah does the affirming for us over and over and over and over again. And that's the beautiful thing about the Quran and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you want to learn how to surrender more, trust more. If you want to learn how to trust more, get to know Allah. Okay. Of course, you can also get to know Allah, in your du'as, but ultimately you need to know who you're speaking to, and that will come from the Quran, inshallah. Okay, my darling, that is where I'm going to leave you for today's episode. I've got a really interesting one for you tomorrow. So make sure you tune in for that one as well, inshallah. I'm not going to tell you what it is about. Ooh, look at her with the cliffhangers. This is not a cliffhanger. This is like a little tease. Oh, look at her with her teasing. Okay, sis, thank you so much for joining me for another episode. I will see you, inshallah, for tomorrow's episode. But until then, my darling friend, please don't forget to live in love.